An attempt at the future of nutrition. In the last 2 years, I have been exploring a project which is to make meal shakes. Now, this is only now part of this. I now want to span up the bigger sphere of what nutrition could be. So, in order to now lay this out, I first of all define an ideal scenario. In this ideal scenario, we have on the one side the need, on the other side we have, so the need is also the demand in this case, on the other side we have the supply. Now, ideally, we have a computational function in between, so a computation in between that connects those two. Now, this computation could also mean that sometimes if there is a need, that is like, I need to eat donuts right now, that the computation in between says, well, it's not a good option, just fast, continue to fast. Because, as you already mentioned earlier, so maybe 2 years ago, you set these goals, and within these goals was, I want to be as healthy as possible at any stage of my life, and therefore I decide for you now, including all of the different research, so the computational algorithm decides that at this point in time it is more useful to continue to fast for another 20 minutes or something like this. And then you could also add multiple layers of overrides. I want to only fast for like 10 minutes if that is okay, and you could also of course define what this algorithm is actually allowed to do. So on the one side you have the need, in the middle you then have the algorithm, kind of a maybe also entity in the future. One could think of a ChatGPT model of some kind, but also more than this. And then on the other side we have the supply. So the supply now would just supply the nutrients basically. So, and that's already most of it. So we have these three entities. The supply is not really an entity. We have the need on the one side, and then we have this interpretation in between. So now one could further subdefine. The need on the one side could be me, for example. I have a certain need, but the need is already the output of me having system 1 as defined by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their book Thinking Fast and Slow. So they define two parts of the mind, rather, or the brain. The one is the kind of autonomous part, the other one, this is called system 1, and the second one is the slow thinking part, so fast and slow thinking. Fast is system 1, and the slow thinking part is the second part. So system 2 thinking is more defined as the rational part of the mind, the slow thinking that can make slow decisions, but not so much, okay, I need to do this right now and I need to run right now, or something like this. So one could define the need, basically subdefine it further into, okay, what does my body say? I want to eat waffles right now. What do I say to this? I as the rational 2, as also the speaking, maybe more speaking, but of course system 1 is mostly supplying the words to whatever I want to as system 2 say right now. If I think of a word and I don't have a register where I can look up these words. So I already get these words, and I already get my mental power from system 1, and so on and so forth. If I think about system 1 thinking about my body plus the part of my mind that I cannot really consciously control, then, well, this would be system 1 thinking. And now if I define the need or subdefine the need further into, okay, what does my body think as of now? And sometimes I think, at least in the last couple of weeks and months, it seems that sometimes my body is like, okay, waffles. So what is waffles? It's kind of a communication, or the element of communication, or the output of the communication that my body attempts to try to make me now search for something that is similar to waffles, because it probably wants a nutritional profile I assume now that the body has a nutritional profile list. So all of the things I have eaten, we together have eaten, are kind of stored in this list, and so there might be also availability bias baked into this, which would maybe include the availability heuristic, kind of, that if there is, let's just say evolutionary speaking, that there was it is more likely that a certain food is available in basically a short time window. So if a fruit, for example, is ripe, if the raspberries are ripe, then it would be useful to have a availability bias built into this lookup of the list. So basically items that have been eaten last in the last time are basically higher prioritized, which then would make use of, okay, these fruits are ripe now, or there is a certain group of animals that I could potentially hunt that then also would be available still. So it would make sense that there would be availability bias baked into this to a certain degree. So if I now have if I in the last weeks, for example, often ate egg powder, then it would also make sense that probably egg powder is more available compared to weeks in which I didn't eat egg powder before. Now, the reason I ate egg powder in the last couple of weeks is because I'm already trying to implement something like this. So we now have the big themes. So on the one side we have the supply, on the other side we have the demand. Now the question is, how do we connect those two, and how do we also make sure that the incentive vectors of the demand and the supply are ideally aligned? Currently, if I go to a restaurant or a grocery store, for example, then at the checkout there might be items that I don't actually want to buy. So with System 2 thinking, I say, okay, these are not things I want to buy right now, but nonetheless there's like now, as I go to this grocery store a couple of weeks ago, for example, at the checkout, cash registers that are a self-checkout, there were just a couple of, there was like a giant box of chocolates that just stood there, and normally it doesn't stand there. So what one tries to do, probably as the entity that tries to sell something, is in this case influence the behavior of the people who shop there in a way that they buy more of this chocolate. Maybe because it soon runs out of in longevity, I don't know the proper word for this, but if there is a date stamped onto there, and then you can only sell it at this point in time. And then if it runs out soon, then maybe sell it at a discount in order to not have to throw it away. So there is an entity that tries to manipulate my otherwise kind of clean demand with basically its own strategies. And this happens all throughout life, one could argue right now, at least in terms of nutrition. So there is, as the incentive vectors are not aligned, so I want to live maybe just as long as possible, or I want to live as healthy as possible, or I want to spend a couple of years or a couple of decades as strong as possible, or something like this. Of course, now one would have to come up with a reasonable set of goals, which everybody, not everybody, or maybe ideally everybody understands also somewhat reasonably, and then one would allow people within a system like this, so within this overarching system, one would then try to build to kind of solve nutrition. One would give people a choice and say, okay, how long do you want to live? Ideally, one would basically include multiple different variables and then determine basically an outcome. And once this is reached, one would then let basically the outcome of this computation influence whatever the outcome of the computation is that connects at any point in time, and with also different constraints in mind, and also the current scientific research regarding nutrition in mind, basically lets this computation then solve basically the demand side. Now, how could this actually look like in practice? Currently, and now again, I think I didn't mention it already, but plugins. Plugins is the idea that I probably am to a certain degree comparable to a computer. So if I am somewhat like a computer, I could also use the different terms that are associated with interacting with a computer, or in computer language, I could also to a certain extent apply this to me, and to also then observe the associations I then make. So if I use ChatGPT currently, or Copilot currently, then I already have plugins available. One of these is music creation, for example. One of these also could be shopping on this website or something like this. So I have been thinking that basically, as I am kind of to a certain degree computation, or a computer that does computation in order to solve problems, I now also can access kind of different plugins. My gym membership, for example, is a plugin that allows me to work out there. It allows me to basically access this space I otherwise couldn't access, and I have to pay a certain fee for it. And then I can access the space, and somebody else organizes this. So somebody else, I basically, to a certain degree, one could say, I outsource the organization of all of this, and somebody else makes sure that the layout of the gym is always somewhat reasonable, that the shower is clean, and so on and so forth. And I can access this by paying a certain fee. And if I don't want to access this, I don't pay this certain fee. So by having this gym membership, I basically activate this plugin, similarly to how I interact with Copilot, activate music creation with this other app, or deactivate this music creation with this other app. And so I, as a computation, also can simplify basically what I can do by having these plugins. And what if now nutrition was a plugin as simple as the gym membership? With the gym membership, it goes as follows. I searched through basically the different options. I also searched for an apartment that would be close to a gym, and of course now there is some bi-directional relationship where you need to, sometimes you don't have the first thing fixed or the second thing fixed, so the question is, which are the variables that act as constraints and which are the variables that act as, variables. So in my case it was like a combination of gym, but also of course the place I'm living in. So now, in terms of nutrition, what if now I could go to a machine, and this machine would now provide me with the ideal nutrition at this point in time, And not only at this point in time, but also keeping, so at this point in time would be one variable. The next variable would be, what is my overarching goal? The next variable would be, do I want to work out, or how often do I work out? And now, this is only like one variable, or maybe an outcome of a computation, an additional computation. So of course it's not just this and this and this as variables, but all of these things could be computations that are kind of multiple layers deep, that rely on other computations, and so on and so forth. So on the one side, we again have the need of the body. The need of the body can now be approximated more and more, maybe in the last 10, maybe also 50 years or 100 years, by basically increasing how well one can approximate the body state with, the body state with measuring it. So currently I now have 2 smartwatches on me. Now, I soon will explain kind of the prototype I'm currently running on, and then also, but I didn't want to introduce this too early in this, because otherwise I think I would have the colors of basically the prototype would have already shown, or the lights of the prototype would already have shown onto the bigger concept I was trying to convey. So the bigger concept now would be that I can just say on these nutrition points, let's just say, okay, the world decided we want to clean up nutrition. And then once you could, and maybe we turn all things that are currently nutrition related, this could be a supermarket, this could be a restaurant, this could be a vending machine. Let's just say the vending machine. The vending machine to a certain extent already also could be considered a plugin. So now what if instead of selling candy at the vending machine, I, for example, as I a couple of weeks ago traveled somewhere else, I stood in the middle of the night at a vending machine because I had to wait 2 or 4 hours for a train. So what if in this situation I could identify myself somehow? So this could be by using, similarly to the gym, for example, I could have a chip. And this chip could be an NFC chip, for example. This chip could also just be basically my smartphone, and I hold it just like in terms of payment. Mobile payment already is a thing. So what if my Garmin or my Galaxy Watch just had basically the connection, and I just check in, and this also allows the payment already. And then at this point in time, basically all the health stats that are collected by these 2 watches are basically considered. Additionally, one could have maybe, as of now already, my glucose could be considered. So if I would have a continuous glucose monitor plugged in somewhere in me, then this also would be considered. If I now have been working out, for example, in the last 24 hours, or you could think of different criteria. In this case, it would be useful maybe to just pull up the activity list I recorded in Garmin, for example. Then we also would maybe have the sleep quality. So the sleep quality would maybe to a certain degree determine how much glucose I actually can tolerate right now. So there seems to be a relation in glucose tolerability, or also insulin resistance. So the lesser the sleep quality, I think the higher the insulin resistance. So of course now sleep quality is only approximated by a sleep score, for example, but of course it's just all an approximation because it's never the real thing. But the better this approximation gets, the better the thing on the other side. And so instead of buying a candy bar, now I could also, for example, set up rules similarly to how there is a blacklist for casinos. So people who are addicted, I think, to casinos can sign up for a blacklist or something like this, and then they are not allowed entry. And something like this could also be implemented probably with nutrition, such that I could, for example, block all of my bank accounts from buying candy at a certain vending machines. Or I could also say, okay, I cannot pay contactless at McDonald's. Or I could also say I cannot pay contactless at all candy stores, at all casino stores. I can make this decision. I can also opt out of this decision, but I only have to maybe set this up once, and then ideally this would be set up. And of course, one now might want to add layers to this, such as I cannot change this decision within like 1 second, but I have to ask a friend, and this friend has a key, and so on and so forth. Similarly to how you would want to set up a website blocker for certain websites, for example, to be able to increase your productivity for work, for example. Or similarly to how you go to the gym, and then there are other people who are observing you, and they are also positively, in my case, usually influencing how well I perform in a given workout. So one could utilize all the different principles that are already kind of known in order to implement something like this. So if I now am in this situation, then I can maybe at this point in time. And now in the future it would maybe be different. But okay, let's just assume the future. What would the future look like? I am on the train station But I could also be on a train station on Mars, for example, in the future. Maybe not. And I have an identification. This identification could be a biomarker. It could also be something else. Now, of course, it would be maybe slightly dystopic if it would be face recognition or something like this. But it doesn't really matter what kind of identification it is. The only thing it needs is a connection. Okay, this ID has these biomarkers. And so I need to have this ID with me. This ID could be anything. It is just an identifier. So now let's just say, okay, I'm at this train station. I log just for the sake of now having something that already would kind of work in, having a working workflow. That's not kind of the point of this. I log in with my Samsung Galaxy Watch 4 in this case. So bing, I am logged in. Then it pulls my blood glucose data, it pulls all of my data on Garmin, also my blood pressure history. Then the next layer would be, okay, what is my last blood draw? I actually did last December a blood draw with InsideTracker, and this blood draw now gave me food recommendations. Now these food recommendations I tried as a prototype to implement. Brian Johnson talks about this idea of what if an algorithm can take better care of you than you could. And he talks about this, and he now also came out with these blueprint products, but they are not individualized. So the next step, to a certain degree, somewhat obviously, one could say, would be the individualization. Also in terms of food, there seem to be so many different things. One person might be lactose intolerant, the other person might not be. One person might do lots of cardio, therefore maybe needing more carbs. The other person might do better and also basically optimize towards longevity with maybe more of a low carb or ketogenic diet, or leaving maybe things like Snickers out of the diet. In my case, if I leave Snickers and anything with sweets or anything that is sweeter than a carrot out of my diet, then I tend to do better. I tend to be mentally more stable, but also I tend to have a little bit more power mentally also. So back to the situation. So I log in. Okay, all of these different things are calculated. It also connects to my InsideTracker account, so it knows that I have this and this and this. Now one could also in the future imagine, okay, there is my genome that is actually uploaded to maybe InsideTracker, which is already available on InsideTracker, and then it pulls in it would pull in my fitness data. It would pull in maybe also my medical history. So what if I have this and this and this, and then it would also take this into account. For example, what if I have something that is basically, what if I have a condition, for example, that is making me on the spectrum of I'm very rational and controlled and I'm very compulsive to more compulsive, then maybe I should have this should consider this algorithm either by me in the long term or by me in the past, basically deciding for me in the future in the kind of the mid and long term, but also maybe by just default, because I have this genetic profile. Of course, then ethics again comes up and so on and so forth, but let's just say it's all optional. So I could opt for something like this. Okay, you have this, would you? So there would be a pop-up, for example, when you set up this nutritional plugin. And this would ask you, okay, you have this variant. This makes you probably more likely to eat sweets in the middle of the night in a train station. So maybe you want to deactivate this and you want to maybe give yourself a little bit of sugar, but not that much sugar, or something like this. And so one could think of the setup process already as also basically deciding on these future decisions, and therefore take out the otherwise nutritional need, and therefore make the whole situation, not the whole situation, but the whole questionnaire that is then answered more rational, compared to, okay, I really need to eat sugar right now, and it needs to be right now, and it needs to be a full cake of I don't know. So I then log in. As of currently, what could it do already? As of currently, what I could have is a shaker with me. And this shaker is now already part of my prototype. This is my food shaker. I also have a water shaker with me. The water shaker I never fill with food powder, and the food shaker I have water in because I need to mix this. It seems to be the case that the form factor powder is currently kind of the most useful because of transportation and also because you can mix multiple powders together. So what if this machine now had basically multiple powders? This could be a basic selection of powders. This could be maybe a selection of multiple powders. This could also maybe be in the future a connection to basically a station. Let's just think of an Amazon hub, but for food. And this Amazon hub, yesterday actually, and this is now something that additionally would maybe speed up the implementation of something like this. So yesterday I saw that a company is trying to build basically an underground tunnel that is delivering mailboxes. So getting rid basically of the labor that is currently required to transport boxes in the last step, which is I think called hyper logistics, basically from car to the person, which then usually works during the day and then is not there, and so there is already kind of a problem. Of course, now there are packaging stations and so on and so forth. So the idea of the startup was that you have any supplier, and basically you would have a box in every home, maybe also companies, and in this box, they made up already a size, you can put in things. And then there is like a very small train, and the diameter of the tube is something like this, and then the tube, similar to the sewage system, goes basically into the different homes, and then you could basically transport things. Similarly to how there is this older version that works with vacuum, which I don't know the proper name of, but it's called a pneumatic tube or conveying system. So what if something like this also existed? What this would allow to do is, instead of the vending machine just having the selection of the couple of powders that are in there, so instead of having multiple sweets or candy in there, it would actually have access, so either in the machine itself, would have access to a couple of powders, maybe it's whey powder, maybe it's protein powder, a different kind of protein powder, or it would already be composite foods. So there would be different levels to this. I might discuss them now following this ideal scenario. But let's just say either in the vending machine itself, or maybe in the underground train station, for example, there would be tubes that are connected to this, and then it would just pull up the powders. And then it would basically mix from the constrained powder selection it has right now. Maybe there are restaurants which have another powder selection. Maybe some in your home, for example, you would have a very constrained powder selection. Maybe if then something like this tube system for packaging delivery exists, you could already say, okay, or it would already be calculated in the morning. Once you stand up, your evening dinner would already be calculated, and then it would be delivered. Or you could imagine that there basically you have all of these different powders at home. Maybe it's a set of 20, maybe it's a set of 25, maybe it's a set of 125. Of course, there would be levels to this, and the more one is able to afford, the higher price these powders could be. Maybe some person only is able to have organic, not non-organic powders, and the other person has organic powders, and also these kind of other supplements, because they just can't pay more. Of course, it will never be an ideal system, and there will probably also be pricing differentiation. But in terms of the system itself, let's just say there's a questionnaire in the beginning, and then once I log in, then I maybe also have a shaker with me, and then what comes out is basically the powder, or maybe not the powder, but the powder already mixed with water. And so now, in the middle of the night, I could have basically an ideal meal. That would be based on my genome, that would be based on the activity I did in the last couple of days, from which one could also extrapolate what I am likely to do in the next couple of days. So one could take a look at, okay, on this weekday I'm usually walking this many steps, and I did so on this many days in the past, and my glucose usually then goes up if I have these foods, and so on and so forth. And so I mean, it's the thing that stands in between this is, one could say, is just computation. All of these elements already exist. I could already have, everybody could carry a shaker. And if one could not carry a shaker, one could also think of, okay, there is a bottle, and we already buy bottles. Of course, it would be maybe not the environmentally most friendly option to just have a cup there that is disposable. Or you could also say, okay, it's disposable cups, but they are not disposable, but you can use them multiple times. Or you would, of course, it is difficult to have maybe a worldwide standard of, okay, we have this size cups, and we all can basically have the same one, and then you could give them back at a different station. There are already systems like this implemented in Germany, for example. There are a couple of systems. I actually recently watched a presentation of one of these. I think one is called Relevo or something like this. One could think of, I think, something like this. And currently I'm using these shakers. So maybe if I just have any cup at all, I could make use of a system like this. But then, of course, what if I lose my shaker? So maybe there's already a cup, similar to how you also at a coffee vending machine, you already get a cup. I mean, it could be as easy as this. The only thing that needs to be changed is basically the ingredients of this, but also the overarching system of this, and also the incentive structures of this. And so it seems to be not the most difficult problem, maybe in terms of its implementation. So here I now want to discuss a couple of steps. So that would be kind of approximations to this, and already would bring the current system closer to maybe the ideal system one could imagine of, okay, I fulfill my body's needs as good as possible. So first one, so maybe a couple of requirements. First of all, one would need to come up with a collection of medical history that would be secure and that would also have to be trusted, not have to be trusted, but that would be trusted. So if I give this my medical history, for example, it would not abuse this, and so on and so forth. The next thing would be the same with all the other activity tracking and also all of the other data I'm giving this. Now, once this is established, one would also have to kind of make sure on the supplier side that there are not too many incentives, at least for basically manipulating this. So one could, for example, say that if I say to the system that I now want to run a marathon in the next 2 hours and I need sugar for this, then I could manipulate the system somehow. But of course now this is just one variable, one situation that again could be implemented in the system. If something like this happens like 2 million times in a year for I don't know how many people, then one could implement a rule like this that would kind of, with choice architecture, basically optimize this. So the first one would be the sharing of the data. That would be ideally then not used against the person or the entity that wants the food or the nutrition. Then another thing would be, well, the optimization of the supply. Maybe I don't know to which extent this can be there could be an argument to be made that the alignment of the incentive vectors has to be, to a certain extent at least, made by governmental entities or by entities that have kind of more the long-term goal in mind. One could also maybe come up with a still kind of economically free structure in which these two different entities, so the person that wants the food and also the company that supplies the food, would maybe align better. I don't know exactly. Of course, now there would be maybe small steps that would basically approximate this ideal, but I don't know so much about this, and I also don't have too many ideas about this. But maybe one would need to fix this ideally. So, okay, now a couple of steps or things that already would be closer to this. So the first one would be to maybe implement so these are now kind of implementations. How can one go more towards this ideal goal of, okay, if I need a certain amount of nutrients, if I need a certain nutrient profile with a certain quantity, how can I get this as easily as possible, and therefore the population would be healthier. So one would be, what if one took the vending machines? Of course, now the question is, how would one implement this? But what if instead of offering sweets at vending machines on train stations at night, there would be some kind of rule? Maybe it needs to be, I don't wanna have this paternalistic view of it needs to be a rule and nobody can eat candy. But again, maybe if this is optional and so on and so forth, maybe it needs to be a evolutionary process where people. But the problem then is that maybe the human mind does not work so well with, okay, I don't want to eat cake for the next 10 years and so on and so forth. So I don't know exactly how to implement this, but it seems to be useful to at least think about this. So one would be, what if instead of all the vending machines that are filled with crap, one would replace them with things that are like protein plus a little bit of something else. So similar to how companies already have come up with kind of meal shakes that are already maybe reasonable options, but they lack the individualization option maybe. But if one just said, okay, one would have better options, if there is a candy bar and it would reduce the sugar amount of the candy bar by maybe 1 gram, this maybe would already be a step in the right direction. I think in the UK they did something like this where they required certain suppliers of a certain type of food, I don't know what food it was, to reduce basically the sugar amount of soda or something like this, but I can't remember what it was. Now, one idea would be taking cigarette automats or vending machines and to just replace them with protein bars. Why not? Why aren't there anywhere protein bars? Basically, the only protein bar vending machine I have is at the gym, and that's now also gone. But also protein bars are kind of made to taste like candy, because there is the competition of, okay, if you have candy available and also healthy food, then healthy food in the short term always kind of loses, unless your body has a very high nutritional need for this very good food or for this healthy food. But it needs to be, in my case at least, it's a process that takes weeks to months until I am kind of used to eating normal food again, that is not sweetened or that is not manipulated, let's just say, by having lots of fat and sugar in there. And so then normal food tastes actually really good, but it doesn't in comparison if you have a cake next to you sitting next to you. So vending machines and protein bars, for example. What if one just introduces just 2 protein bars in a vending machine instead of all of the other options? The only somewhat reasonable option there is kind of a beef steak, I think, and maybe nuts. But nuts also, in terms of the nutritional profile, are not exactly ideal, at least for what I am trying to do with my sport and nutrition and so on. So now the current system I am kind of operating on. There is also another idea I already had and I wrote already down as of this morning. So the current situation I am operating on. I have now chosen to replace, so this could now also be kind of part of the questionnaire. How many meals do you want to replace? So if I just say, okay, I want to replace 1 meal with a shake that is also including my last blood draw, and therefore also the latest scientific research on this, and then in the morning already I could have fulfilled my vitamin needs, my mineral needs, and so on and so forth, with drinking, for example, this one shake. So what I've been doing is I have been trying to gather data on the one side, and part of this data is Inside Tracker, and they give me food recommendations. I then said, okay, what if I turned this into a food shake? And so I have been, as part of this pilot project that I have made up for myself, I have been drinking a morning drink, which is made up of the ingredients that Inside Tracker said. So, of the ingredient tracker recommendations that were nutritional recommendations, I took all that were in powdered form, and I took all of them that I deemed somewhat useful. Maybe if they had a nutritional profile that I actually kind of went against something else or another rule, I didn't take them into account. But then I put all of these basically into a box, and I then stirred them up, and this is now my morning drink. Which means my morning drink is already kind of algorithmically determined by my blood work in last December. And the same would be true for maybe, because Inside Tracker also has a connection to Garmin, it also knows my VO2 max, for example, and also my resting heart rate, and also my activity. So maybe it's also already included in this calculation. The next obvious step would be to have my kind of proper medical history, and not just the things I track, and maybe also on a private basis kind of track, and to have this also connected to the system. So now one could, for example, make up a choice. This choice would be, most people have maybe in between 1 and 5 meals in a day. One could say, okay, how many meals do you want to replace with ideal nutritional meals that in this case, as of currently, maybe are in a powdered form. And now this powdered form would be, for example, so maybe in order to explain this now further, I show you a picture of my kitchen cupboard, which I took as of this morning, and it looks like this. So on the one side I have a couple of protein powders, on the other side I have empty protein powder bags, which are composites. And these composites include, in my case, multiple ingredients. And because I have protein powder on the one side, so I have beef protein powder, I have whey protein powder, and plant protein powder. Then I have egg powder, and on the other side I have basically a mixture of those. And then on the lower side I have supplements, and on the other side I have ingredients for the basic composites. So I make kind of my own meal shakes, and for certain situations I then have basically multiple meal shakes which allow me to make them faster as if I did not make these. So if I just took all of the ingredients again and again, then it also is kind of hard to do the thing. And I think I also allow my body to a certain degree to then realize, okay, this is milkshake 3, and this is milkshake 4, and to then say, okay, now we need more like milkshake 3. And a quick test is maybe to just smell at the milkshake. So sometimes I smell at the whey protein in order to kind of ask my body, do you want to eat this right now, or is it maybe something else you want to? Now, currently, I'm ordering all of these myself. So the ingredients exist basically in the landscape of things you can order. And the ingredients exist, I then search them, and then once they arrive at my home is kind of the powder hub. Now, my kitchen is kind of where the powders are. And in this case, I then take all of the ingredients at any point in time. So whenever I'm hungry, I now could potentially take all of the ingredients and then mix a milkshake. Now, I only do this a couple of times a day. The rest of the day I eat usually normally. And usually I drink shakes in the beginning of the day, because then it allows me to use more of the time that is kind of after I have waken up, which is usually when I'm mentally more or clearer, that I then can use this time for. And if I then introduce already eating, then I'm taking away from this time, and I tend to eat usually normally in the later part of the day. So currently all of this is happening kind of in my kitchen. Now, but I have to have these whey powders, and I have to also test them first, and then over the course of, in this case, 2 years, I now have basically tested these, and I also take notes on the effects of these, and whether this protein powder is better or this protein powder, or what this ingredient might do. And part of these ingredients are also recommended by Inside Tracker to me. I just bought them in a powdered form. And so now I have this morning drink, which includes, so I take the morning drink, which includes a couple of different things, like flaxseed, like a green powder by bulk, then protein powder currently not, because I every day mix the protein powder, and sometimes I drink this without the protein powder, which allows me a greater flexibility, because sometimes I'm not that hungry, sometimes I need this protein powder, and sometimes I need this one. So I have basically 2 tablespoons of this shake that is kind of also partially at least based on Inside Tracker, also on my blood work, and maybe to a certain extent also on my fitness data. And so I take this, and then the rest of the day I take basically, I take this morning drink plus my supplements in the morning. And so everything else is just macronutrients kind of simplified. Of course it is not really, and I still eat vegetables and so on and so forth, but the idea is that the morning drink, in addition to having the Inside Tracker things in there, also fulfills my kind of macronutrient needs. Not macro, but micronutrient needs. And so this serves kind of as the nutritional thing, not as the nutritional thing, but as the nutritional insurance in the morning, such that I don't have to worry that much about, okay, magnesium. What if I then cramp in the morning, as I did today, for example? I woke up cramping, with a cramping leg, which seems to happen often. So this seems to be kind of a result of maybe the multivitamin with minerals having too low magnesium content. So maybe I then introduce something like, okay, a little bit of electrolyte powder to this morning drink, in order to basically have kind of a stable nutrition that then results in not that many cramps, or reduces the cramp frequency. So in the later parts of the day, I then can basically at any point in time. So these are the 2 shakers I have in my rucksack. In my rucksack I also have 2 additional shakers which contain protein powder. The first one is whey, the second one is plant protein powder. I also tried nutritional shakes that already are available but not individualized, like Huel, and basically that's it, because the rest is then bulk, which is basically ingredients. I buy these ingredients at this company, and so I mix my own meal shakes, because the other one did not really work out. Huel, for example, has one that is kind of for the standard population. It also has one that contains more protein, but it seems to be that it is just more expensive compared to buying the ingredients myself, which then I kind of have to do, because otherwise it would be too expensive in terms of the grocery cost. Now, maybe there are things that if I additionally buy an electrolyte powder and something else, then it actually becomes kind of closer in terms of the price to something that is already a pre-made meal shake. But it also seems to be the case, I tried this for a couple of months or weeks, and I had them, that it just doesn't work as well as one would expect, because my body seems to need a bigger selection of foods out of which it then can choose, at least for the kind of standard if I'm at home. If I then travel for a couple of days, then I can rely maybe more on protein powders, or I use the protein powder in order to supplement the protein to the rest of my meals, in order to alter the macronutrient ratio of these meals in a way that is then positive in my case. So currently I already have an implementation of this, but it is at my home. It is kind of complicated or it is more complicated than it could be. Let's just say, what if there was a service that, first of all, now first implementation of this would be this implementation I already have. A second implementation could be, instead of having 20 kilograms or 15 kilograms of powder at my home, that I would have a company that already says, similar to a company that is called My Muesli, that allows you to basically mix your own muesli and then have it. The problem is just that this is usually, I think, too pricey, and so it is kind of a thing you don't usually buy. And so what if there was a company that made that made the meal shake, so you wouldn't have to mix the ingredients, and you would also have to not worry about all the different proportions of the ingredients and when do you buy this, because this runs at a discount and this runs at a discount then, and then the delivery takes 2 weeks, and then it's delivered to a packaging station, and then you have to get it, and it's all through, and it's 3 kilometers away, and it's this very big package, and you then get it with the bike, but it turns out you cannot really drive with the bike because it's this really big package, and so on and so forth. So what if it was as easy as signing up for this website? This website then connects to either multiple services or already one service, and then it would ask you how many of your meals do you want to replace with this nutritional powder, and then it would say, and you would say maybe the first meal, and then based on this, it would also, for example, take into account that maybe usually the first meal and the last meal of the day should be higher in protein in order to basically cover the rest of the day, or the day that is then fasting, with basically protein in the night. And so, also including things like these, it would maybe then, if you choose the one meal and that would be the morning meal, that is usually your shake, then it would take also something like this into account, and then it would also take your Inside Tracker data into account or similar services, and then also your medical history and so on and so forth, and what the goals are you're trying to achieve, and then it would deliver this powder to you, to your home, and then it would be basically like a food powder, like the food powders that are already available, but it would be individualized, so therefore it would improve your health basically with every sip of this drink. Now one could also think of, okay, I buy all of these ingredients and there are different sets, so maybe one contains 25 sets, and this is for the next 6 months. One contains not 25 sets, but 25 different powders. Then one could also say, okay, buy me everything for a year, and the next thing would be, I don't know, 250 powders and all of the different things, and also maybe in the future drugs and so on and so forth that already would be mixed into your morning shake. Think of people, elderly people maybe, who take 5, 7, 10 different drugs, for example, or have to take them, and then they would already be ideally mixed in such a way that there are no complications between the drugs, and they would just have to drink this one thing in the morning. Make it as simple as possible in this case. Just the 3 or 5 supplements I have, I think it's the multivitamin and mineral, then the omega-3s, and also I take 1 curcumin capsule. That's basically my supplements in the morning, and the rest I consider nutrition. And so already these 3, to take them out of the bottles and to maybe also prepare them for a week, but then you need more storage space. What if this was simplified so much that you would just have one shake like this in the morning, and then in there would be all of the different things you actually really, really need, at least at this point in time. Then our next iteration would be that you would have multiple powders, and then with these multiple powders there would be a shake mixed. And so I could say, okay, at this point in time, let's just say I want to work out or go on a bike ride in like 2 hours, and then I would again log in, and maybe at home I would be logged in anyway all the time, and then I would just go with my shaker or any other vessel, go to this, and it again would mix the ideal shake for me. And it would also maybe also between fasting and not fasting. So sometimes it would just give me water, but not only water, but electrolyted water, because it kind of knows that my body temperature went up, which could be a sign, for example, that I am low in magnesium or something like this. Often, for example, after I eat lots of carbs, my body temperature actually goes up and my thirst does not go up. But if I then drink, and especially if I drink also electrolyted, then it seems to be the case that my body temperature again is reduced. Now, to a certain extent, one would maybe not want to include so many individual observations, because these could be not that right, one could say, but just more err on the side of just relying on the actual data that is measured. So not Samsung but Garmin, for example, can measure my skin temperature, my respiratory rate, and so on and so forth. And so just by, okay, I drink this, and then it is again tracked, the health data is again tracked, and then having a year of nutrition with this system. And again, all of these feedback loops would basically improve the system again and again. If the meal shaker, for example, let's just call it the meal shaker, makes me a shake, and then my body temperature goes up by 4 degrees in the next couple of hours, then it could say, okay, based on the research, what ingredient is most likely. And so we reduce this by a couple of %, and we also know that this person did less activity here and there, and then we try the next shake, and the next shake, and the next shake. So by also doing this, one could have an experiment that is basically running on everybody who had something like this, like a meal shaker with these different kind of powder selections. Maybe some people would have organic powders, maybe some people would have access to luxury powders, I don't know. But by setting up the system, one could therefore improve nutrition again and again and again, and would also have kind of, ideally, I would have also not only ideally I would have maybe only one watch, and this one watch would also measure my blood glucose, which Samsung and Apple have been reported to work on for the last couple of years, that they would be able to measure blood glucose. Maybe not only blood glucose, but also ketones. Maybe not only ketones, but also maybe in the future my testosterone, for example. And if my testosterone is low for 4 weeks, then the system decides on its own, because I gave it the rights to decide basically on this and on this and on this, that it slightly introduces, I don't know, a compound that increases my testosterone slightly, or alters the meal timing, for example, in order to make more room for growth hormone at night, such that the growth hormone phase is basically a longer fast, and so on and so forth. So one person is probably not very able to observe basically all of the different things that come out in terms of nutrition, and therefore to optimize this constantly, and also is otherwise probably constantly fighting this old evolutionary program, at least parts of it, that are kind of maladaptive as of now, and also kind of the maladaptive outcomes of this problem that the current supply is not really incentive aligned with the current need.